Thank you very much.
Yep. All right. Is that good? I'm going to assume so, that the stream's back on. And witnesses, did we get the other time?
Sorry, I have 45 minutes and 6 seconds for the plaintiff, so I'm conferring with the other timekeeper now.
That's accurate. I have 45 minutes and 6 seconds for the plaintiff too.
All right. Are the parties ready to proceed to closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
If I may I reserve 3 minutes for a rebuttal closing?
You can have for rebuttal closing whatever time you have left. I'll just leave it up to you to decide how you split that.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Combs. Plaintiff close.
Okay. When all signs point to one conclusion, that conclusion is usually the right one. And today, all signs have pointed to just one conclusion. And that conclusion is that the defendant caused the death of Lou Donaldson. Now, I want to take you back to where it all began for the last time, when Karen was happy and hopeful. When she met Lou on the side of that Pioneer Road, she saw a life she could only dream of, a home and prosperity. But we fast forward to 2012 and Karen's no longer happy and hopeful. She's sad and she's angry. She's angry because Lou, her husband, has just told her that he wants a divorce. And as soon as he says this, she sees everything that she's gained in the past decade start to disappear right before her eyes. Her home, gone. Prosperity, gone. Her livelihood, all gone. So Karen, desperate to maintain this lifestyle that she's become accustomed to, keeps a promise that she has disguised as a threat to kill Lou Donaldson. And on August 17th, 2012, Lou Donaldson was seen for the very last time because the defendant had a motive, she had a plan, and she executed that plan. And that's why we're here today. As the party bringing this case to you, we have the burden of proof. And that burden is something that we have had from the very second this trial has started up until this very moment. That burden is something that we have embraced. It is something we have not ran from. And it is something that we are confident that we have met. We must show you today, or we must prove to you today, by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning that it's more likely than not that 1, Lou Donaldson is dead. 2, the death of Lou Donaldson was caused by the defendant's intentional or reckless conduct. 3, the plaintiff, Cam Donaldson, suffered injuries, damages, or losses as a result of the death of Lou Donaldson. And 4, the defendant's conduct, either intentional or reckless, was the cause of the plaintiff's injuries or damages. Now, I want to take you back to the facts and the evidence and the signs that you have all seen and heard today, so that you and I can agree that all signs do point to just one conclusion, and that all 4 of these elements have been met. So let's start with the first one. Lou Donaldson is dead. We heard today that the defendant, on August 18th, 2017, requested a court to change Lou's status from missing to legally dead. And they granted that request. And she walked out of the doors of the courthouse and she walked through the doors of Summit Life Insurance Company and she cashed out a $5 million life insurance policy on the very same day that Lou Donaldson was declared legally dead. So we know this element has been met. Now, the second element, the death of Lou Donaldson was caused by the defendant's intentional or reckless conduct. Now, for this element, I want to focus on the word caused because that's what this case really comes down to. And to show you that the defendant did cause the death of Lou Donaldson, we just have to look at her motive, her plan, and the execution of her plan. So let's first start with her motive. You heard today that the defendant has come from a humbled upbringing. But when she met Lou, she got a taste of a more successful lifestyle. But over time, when Lou's love faded and he wanted a divorce, you heard that the defendant didn't really take that very well because she threatened to kill him over it. And after she threatened to kill him over it, you heard that he was so scared. Cam, his own son, told you that he has never seen his father so terrified that Lou felt the need to try to get a restraining order against the defendant. And that's when she knew Lou was serious. He was going to leave, and she was going to lose everything. So that's her motive. Maintain the lifestyle that she's become accustomed to. So now that she has her motive, she just needs a plan. So let's talk about her plan. She knows to ensure that she maintains that lifestyle, she has to do something because Lou's done and he's leaving. So her wheels are turning and she finally thinks of a two-step plan. The first step, a will for Lou that says she gets everything. Second step, make Lou disappear. Because with Lou gone and that will in place, she can take everything. So now that she has her motive and she has her plan, she just has to execute that plan. So let's talk about how she executed the first part of her plan, that will. You heard today that Lou Donaldson supposedly signed a will giving the defendant everything that he has just 2 days after he wanted a restraining order against her, after she threatened to kill him, after he wanted a divorce. Just ask yourselves, members of the jury, what makes sense and what's more likely than not? Is it more likely than not that Lou Donaldson, who had a great relationship with his son Cam, decided to leave the defendant everything he has after everything that happened? No, that doesn't make sense. You heard from two experts today, our expert, Taylor Pride, and the defense expert, Chris Renard, and they both examined that will, and they both agreed on some things. Both experts agreed that that will was suspicious. Both experts agreed that they have never seen the phrase die or disappear in a will. And both of our experts agreed that Lou Donaldson's signature on the will didn't match Lou Donaldson's signature anywhere else. Our expert, Investigator Pride, told you through his extensive analysis, he was able to tell you that he is confident that that will was forged. Now, the only thing you heard from Chris Renard for the defense, he could only say that his findings were inconclusive and he can't say whether the will is genuine or not. So what that actually means is he doesn't know whether the will was forged or not. So the defense hasn't given you an expert to say that it wasn't forged, but we most certainly gave you an expert to say it was. So is it more likely than not that Lou signed that will? Or is it more likely than not that the defendant executed the first part of her plan? That's more likely than not. Look at the signs and look at where they point. And now that we know that she's executed the first part of her plan, the will, she just has to execute the second part of her plan, make Lou disappear and cause the death of Lou Donaldson. Now, to understand this, you just have to understand something that you will be instructed on, and that's circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence holds the same weight as direct evidence, and all circumstantial evidence is different pieces of evidence, different signs, all pointing to one conclusion. And you've heard a lot of those signs today. The will was one. But now I want to talk about another sign that points to this conclusion, and that's the defendant's weak alibi. The defendant expects you to believe that the night her husband disappeared, she was getting milk for cats at the grocery store at 3 o'clock in the morning. Again, ask yourselves, what makes sense and what's more likely than not? The defendant told you that those cats were born a few days before this and that she had been taking care of them, nurturing them, as she said. So is it more likely than not that she just realized she needed milk at 3 a.m. that night? No, it's not. If she's telling the truth, and if she had been taking care of these cats for days, she would have known before 3 o'clock in the morning that night that she needed milk for cats. So then ask yourselves, is it more likely than not that she went to the store at 3 a.m.? Is it more likely than not that she forgot her phone? Is it more likely than not that she had car troubles? And is it more likely than not that she called her brother just because she wasn't sure if her husband was home? No, that doesn't make sense. And the only person who could even confirm the defendant's alibi, her brother, isn't here today. We didn't hear from him. So ask yourselves, is it more likely than not that this roadside grocery store pickup happened? No, it's not. Again, you heard from two experts today that investigated this disappearance of Lou. Our expert, Investigator Pride, who has investigated cases for almost 20 years, told you that all of the signs and all of the evidence pointed him to the conclusion that the defendant is responsible for Lou's disappearance. Now, the defense expert, he said that she wasn't responsible, but I want you to remember how he got that conclusion. He didn't look at any evidence. He didn't look at any reports. He didn't follow up on the defendant's alibi. And he didn't see those DNA results from when the police tested the defendant's meat grinder for blood or human DNA. And yet he still ruled her out as a suspect. Why did he do that? Just because his buddy told him to. His buddy who works at the same place as the defendant's brother. So, is it more likely than not that he gave you a thorough investigation? No, he didn't. The defense didn't give you an expert who gave you a thorough investigation today, but we most certainly gave you one who did. So based on this evidence and based on everything that I've walked through, ask yourselves, is it more likely than not that this alibi is true and she went to the grocery store at 3 a.m.? No, it's not. What's more likely than not is that the defendant was in the process of getting rid of Lou Donaldson that night. We have showed you that it is more likely than not that the death of Lou Donaldson was caused by the defendant's intentional or reckless conduct. Now, for the third element, the plaintiff, Cam Donaldson, has suffered injuries, damages, or losses as a result of the death of Lou Donaldson. Well, ask yourselves, did Cam suffer from the loss of his father? Of course he did. His father was his best friend, his companion, and he worked for his dad for 20 years. So with his father's gone, he not only lost his father, he lost his best friend, he lost his companion, and he lost his job. Of course he suffered. Now, the defense here today has told you from the beginning, Mr. Esposito told you that Cam hates Karen and that he just wants money. He's greedy and he blames Karen and has to accept the truth today. But Cam was honest with you. Cam told you he hates the defendant. And why wouldn't he? The defendant, who was 20 years younger than his dad, threatened to kill his dad. The evidence shows you that she got rid of his dad. And now she takes everything his dad has. Of course he hates the defendant. Of course he blames the defendant. That doesn't make him greedy. That makes him human. And humans suffer when they lose a loved one, such as their father. So we know the third element has been met. And for the fourth and final element, the defendant's conduct, either intentional or reckless, was the cause of the plaintiff's injuries or damages. This one is just a domino effect, because if the defendant caused the death of Lou Donaldson and Cam Donaldson suffered from that death, well, we know that the defendant's conduct, either intentional or reckless, most certainly was the cause of the plaintiff's injuries or damages. We have showed you that it is more likely than not that all four elements have been met. We have met our burden. And we came here today because Cam was hurt, and so was Lou, both of them, by the hands of the defendant. So because the defendant has caused all of this pain and suffering, and because we showed you that our burden has been met, when you go back to the jury room, you must find for Cam. And when you do find for Cam, you're going to have to decide how much the defendant owes Cam. And we can make this simple for you. Because of the defendant's conduct, because she caused the death of Lou Donaldson, she got a $5 million estate, and she got a $5 million life insurance policy. Because of her two-step plan, she got two things she didn't deserve. So give Cam $10 million, because we can't give him what he truly wants, which is his father. Because if his father was here, the defendant, she wouldn't have that estate. She wouldn't have that life insurance policy. So give Cam $10 million, because the defendant should have never had it in the first place. And you can do this, because when all signs point to one conclusion, that conclusion is usually the right one. And today, all signs have pointed to one conclusion, and that conclusion is that the defendant caused the death of Lou Donaldson and caused the damages and injuries to the plaintiff. And you as a jury have the power to make that right conclusion. So we ask you, find that conclusion and find for Cam Donaldson. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Combs. Ms. Reed, defense closing.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Sometimes the truth is hard to accept. On August 18, 2012, Karen lost the love of her life. Tragically, her husband, her friend, here one moment and gone the next. And ever since that day, Cam Donaldson, Karen's stepson, has tried to turn her tragedy into a nightmare, accusing her of crimes, dragging her through the mud, suing her, and forcing her to come into court to defend herself. And today we found out why. Because for Cam, the truth, he was left out of his father's will. The truth, Lou left everything to Karen. Well, that's hard to accept, and he won't accept it. Members of the jury, the plaintiffs got up here and told you a tragic story about a man who went from missing to deceased. A man who left everything and everyone behind. But it's what they told you next, we just can't agree on. Because they got up here and tried to blame Karen for Lou's disappearance. And by blaming Karen, that's exactly the burden they took on in proving. Not just that Lou is missing, not just that Lou may have passed away, but that Karen and Karen alone was responsible for what happened. That she caused his death, either intentionally or recklessly. That's their burden. That's what they have to prove. So I want you to think about the burden. And as we talk about all the evidence, I want you to keep two questions in mind. And those are the questions my co-counsel asked you earlier. Where is Lou? And why does Cam really blame Karen? Because as we stand here today, at the end of this case, the plaintiffs, they either can't answer those questions or they refuse to acknowledge the truth, no matter how hard it is to accept. Now let's talk about why. You learned a lot about Lou Donaldson today. You learned he was passionate about two things, Karen Baja and exotic animals. You also learned that Karen was 20 years younger than Lou. And when they first met, he was married. He left his first wife, his son Cam, and he married Karen. He left his old family behind. But he didn't just marry Karen. They started a thriving business together. The Wild Wildlife Tiger and Big Cat Emporium. They filled it with lions and tigers. They worked day in and day out to build that business. Build a life. But Lou's wild side, it didn't just stop with the animals. Now the plaintiff got up here and tried to turn Lou and Karen's life, their love, their story, into some twisted tale of jealousy, deceit, and murder. Well, folks, that just doesn't make sense. They're trying to say Karen has a weak alibi. But what's most important, members of the jury, Karen doesn't have to prove anything. She doesn't have to bring in any evidence. That's the plaintiff's job. Her testimony is what it has always been. She was caring for the newborn cubs. And that evidence today stands unrefuted and unchallenged. The plaintiff has not put up one witness today that said they saw Karen hauling off a body or at the airstrip. It makes a great story, but the evidence just doesn't prove it. And the plaintiff wants you to believe that because Karen was at the office the morning after Lou disappeared, she must have done it. Folks, that just doesn't make sense. Karen being at the office is not evidence of a murder, a killing, or a cover-up. Her husband, her business partner, he was missing. She had every right in the world to go check on things at the office, to see if he was inside, or to see if anything had been stolen. You heard about the mysterious lockbox that Cam said was stolen from the office. But the truth is, Cam doesn't know what was inside that box. Could have been a will, could have been something else. But that was the plaintiff's job to prove to you today. Cam's story, it's filled with forged papers, life insurance policies, and millions of dollars. Again, it makes a great story, but the evidence just doesn't prove it. Now, the will. You've heard a lot about that today. You saw the will today, and it left everything to Karen. That was Lou's wish. But the plaintiff got up here and tried to say that couldn't have been true. And the plaintiff tried to say that Karen forged the will. But members of the jury, I want you to think back to the testimony. You heard about the life insurance policy. Cam wasn't a beneficiary. Cam's mom wasn't a beneficiary. It was only Karen, just like the will. And though it may be hard for the plaintiff to accept that Lou left everything to Karen, that's why he wrote that will. And they tried to say it was forged. And they went as far to say that Karen did it. But members of the jury, I want you to think back to their expert that they put on the stand. Sure, he said that signature wasn't Lou's, but that's what he was paid to do. But what I want you to think about is what he didn't say. Because that signature, it wasn't Karen's. We know he had that will, and it had Karen's signature and handwriting on it. He could have compared it to this forged signature. He could have got on the stand and told you point blank if it was Karen who signed it. But he didn't. He couldn't. And I want you to think long and hard about why. Because that signature wasn't Karen's. It didn't match because she didn't forge that will. Not only that, you heard from our expert witness, Chris Renard. And he concluded that the will was not forged. And with his many years of experience, he also said there's many reasons why a person's signature can change, such as age, health, care when signing, the instrument used, or simply a person just wants their signature to look different. It's not as black and white as the plaintiff's claim. And then the plaintiff got up here and tried to convince you that because Lou mentioned divorce, that all of a sudden Karen's a killer. We admit, she admitted. Their marriage was far from perfect. They had their fair share of problems, but that doesn't equal murder. Now, there's an old statistic that says the majority of marriages end in divorce. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But what we know as truth, just because your spouse mentions divorce doesn't give you a motive for murder. Members of the jury, you have to ask yourselves, why are we here? Why is Karen in this courtroom? Why is Cam suing her? Cam can't accept the truth. He was left out of his father's will entirely. That would make anyone upset, angry, wanting to blame somebody, and I mean anybody. Unfortunately, that someone is Karen. This was the only way that Cam could cover up the pain of his father not leaving him only once when he was younger, but twice by leaving him out of the will. We didn't have a burden today, folks. We didn't have to put up any evidence or any witnesses, but we put up 2 witnesses to cut through all the smoke and mirrors. You heard from Chris Renard, an investigator for the Summit Life Insurance Company. And we know what insurance companies do. They look at a claim and decide whether to pay it out. And that's just what Chris did. He looked at the will and the facts surrounding Lou's disappearance. And we know his overall conclusion: to find Karen didn't forge that will and to pay her the $5 million. Now think about that for a moment, folks. Chris works for the insurance company. He has every reason to save his company the embarrassment of a false payout. He has 5 million reasons to go over to Cam's side to say Karen was involved, but he didn't. He couldn't. Because at the end of the day, as hard as the truth may be to accept, there was no forgery. And then you heard from Karen. Karen married the love of her life at a young age, and they had some hard times. She was devastated when she found out Lou was having an affair with a woman in Costa Rica, but they were working through it. And through their marriage and their love for exotic animals, they started a thriving business. But unfortunately, Karen's life came tumbling down when her husband went missing on August 18th, 2012. She hoped, she prayed, and she waited for him to come home. And unfortunately, he never did. That is a devastating reality for anyone to face. Now, the judge is going to come up here in a moment and instruct you on the law. And that's what the plaintiffs had to prove to you today. And all that boils down to is whether or not you believe the plaintiffs proved Karen killed her husband. You either believe they met their burden or they didn't. But members of the jury, you've been sitting in this courtroom all day just like me. And I submit to you, they have failed. I asked you to keep in mind two questions when I got up here today. Where is Lou? And why does Cam really blame Karen? Well, we don't have the answer to the first one. The plaintiffs have failed to answer that question. But we do have the answer to the second one. And you've seen it firsthand. Cam can't accept the truth. Just like the life insurance policy, Cam can accept his father didn't leave anything. That his father chose Karen again. And after seeing all the evidence and seeing and hearing all the testimony and seeing what the plaintiffs want you to ignore, we are confident we have shown you that Karen was not responsible for the disappearance of Lou Donaldson. We submit the evidence and the truth. Well, they say the plaintiff. They have not proven their case. And that's a truth. Well, a truth they'll have to accept. Find Karen not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. And plaintiff, Ms. Combs, any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly. Members of the jury, Ms. Reed and I are asking you for the same thing. We all want the truth. We all wish we could answer where is Lou, but unfortunately the only person who knows that is the defendant. And throughout this whole trial, we have asked you to look at the signs and look at where they point. Now, the defense wants you to think that all signs are pointing at Cam. But we have showed you that that is not true because all signs still point to the defendant and her motive and her plan and the execution of her plan. We showed you all the signs. We showed you the impending divorce. We showed you the fights. We showed you the death threat. We showed you the attempted temporary restraining order against the defendant. We showed you that will that supposedly was signed by Lou Donaldson 2 days after the restraining order. And we showed you that Lou did in fact go missing. He disappeared. And I want you to remember what the defendant told you. She told you that Lou disappears often. He travels often, and that's why she didn't call him. And as Ms. Reed just said, she has been hoping and praying that he comes back, but there's a problem with that because if he disappears all of the time and she wants him back, then why is it this time he disappeared? The defendant immediately took over the business. Why is it this time he disappeared? The defendant immediately fired Cam. And why is it this time he disappeared? The defendant shows up with a will that says if he dies or disappears, she gets everything. Again, think about it. What makes sense? What's more likely than not? We showed you those signs. And we showed you that those signs point to the conclusion. And we showed you that we have met our burden. It's more likely than not. that the defendant caused the death of Lou Donaldson. And that's the right conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. So we will now submit the case to the jury. If I can get the advocates all to get on the screen. We're not going to give comments in this forum. I think they probably told you that in one of the team meetings. All the judges are going to go type in our scores, and we'll put comments there that you guys will get as well. So I'll say this is my parting words to you. Fantastic job, all of you. Wonderful job. It was fun for me to watch the advocacy that every single person put forward. Great job to everyone, and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.